Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amit Harari, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on a political weekend trip to Paris discussing Mideast burning issues with French President Emmanuel Macron. Meantime, a former Hamas ally now agreeing to fully normalize ties with Israel, and what are the implications? And later, the cold never bothered us anyway, as snow season is coming with Israelis ready to fully enjoy it. Security forces conducted a major anti-terror operation in a Palestinian refugee camp next to Jericho. A firefight erupted with 13 militants injured and 6 arrested in the attempt to nab suspects in a recent terrorist shooting at a nearby restaurant. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
Hundreds of Israeli security forces took part in the early morning raid at the Aqabat refugee camp next to Jericho on Saturday. The operation of combined forces was an attempt to round up terrorist suspects in a shooting attack last week. According to reports, mosques in the refugee camp issued calls for residents to defend the area during the military operation. Clashes broke out with local militants, and 13 Palestinians were reportedly injured. The IDF says militants fired at the troops and live fire was returned, wounding several Palestinians. No Israeli soldiers were injured in the operation. 6 terrorist suspects were detained for questioning. The prime suspects in the shooting attack were not captured. Troops surrounded the building where the suspects were barricaded. Anti-tank missiles were reportedly fired at the structure in order to force a surrender. According to IDF intelligence, the suspects had been in the building planning more attacks. The raid was an attempt to capture the cell that opened fire at a restaurant near the Almog Junction a week earlier. In that attack, the gunman opened fire with an assault rifle, but the weapon apparently jammed after the first shot, and he fled the scene. There were no injuries in the attack. The gunman remains at large. In recent months, Palestinian gunmen have targeted soldiers and civilians on the roads in Judea and Samaria. Yesterday's raid came a day after an unarmed Palestinian man was killed after lunging at Palestinian soldiers at an outpost near Nablus. Troops first fired warning shots into the air. After the suspect continued to refuse calls to halt, they fired directly at him, killing him. A military source said the suicide note was found on his body. The latest incidents came as the IDF pressed on with an anti-terror offensive to deal with terrorist attacks that left 31 people dead in Israel in 2022 and 7 more in an attack in Jerusalem last weekend. The security operation has netted more than 2,500 arrests in near nightly raids. It's also left 171 Palestinians dead in 2022 and another 36 since the beginning of the year, most while carrying out attacks or during clashes with security forces. In a separate security development, the Iron Dome missile defense system shot down an unidentified aircraft flying over the Gaza Strip on Saturday. According to the IDF, the UAV did not enter Israeli airspace, and the missile took it down while over Gaza.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with France's president, business leaders, and members of France's Jewish community during a trip to Paris over the weekend, discussing various Middle East issues and receiving some sympathy from Emmanuel Macron. French President Emmanuel Macron meeting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the end of the week for a working dinner at the Élysée Presidential Palace in Paris. Upon his arrival, Netanyahu being welcomed by Macron with hugs as the two immediately entered for a nightly dinner. At the center of Netanyahu and Macron's conversation being Iran, the war in Ukraine, the situation in Lebanon, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Macron continued by expressing to Netanyahu his solidarity with Israel in the face of terrorism after 7 Israelis were killed near a synagogue in Jerusalem last Friday, and added his willingness to contribute to a restart of dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis, according to a palace statement. The trip to Paris being Netanyahu's first political trip since entering office, and while wanting the first visit to be in Abu Dhabi, reminding everyone who brought the Abraham Accords to the world, the Emiratis said that with all due respect, the time was not yet ripe for visits. After meeting the French president, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with senior leaders of the Jewish community in France, saying, "There's a great convergence in our positions. This does not mean that they are the same, but there is most definitely a convergence," Netanyahu said during the meeting dealing with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Africa. Against the backdrop of the claims the new judicial reforms will be harming the Israeli economy, Netanyahu noting he met earlier with French businessmen who showed confidence in the Israeli economy, also adding that Israel is very strong on the global economic map. And moreover, Netanyahu also addressing French Jews wanting to immigrate to Israel with a smile.
כל יהודי באשר הוא, כל יהודייה באשר היא, רשאים להחליט איפה, מהו עתידם האינדיבידואלי. אבל כל אחד צריך לדעת שאם הוא רוצה או רוצה לעלות למדינת ישראל, אנחנו נקבל אתכם בזרועות פתוחות, בשטיח אדום.
The former Hamas ally Sudan has agreed to fully normalize relations with Israel. Terrorist groups are pleading with the new Sudanese government to change course, but Khartoum appears determined to become a full partner in the Abraham Accords. ILTV Steve Leibovitz reports.
Sudan is on its way to becoming the latest Arab state to join the Abraham Accords with Israel. The two countries finalized a deal in Khartoum to normalize relations. Khartoum was long remembered by Israelis as the city where the Arab League in 1967 proclaimed its 3 no's resolution on Israel: no recognition, no peace, and no negotiations. The announcement came during a visit to the Arab nation by Foreign Minister Eli Cohen.
אני שמח לבשר לכם שבמסגרת הביקור סיכמנו לחתום הסכם שלום בין סודאן וישראל. סודאן היא מדינה ערבית, מוסלמית ואסטרטגית מבחינת מדינת ישראל. ההסכם צפוי להיחתם השנה, והוא יהיה הסכם השלום הרביעי של ישראל לאחר הסכמי השלום עם מצרים וירדן.
The development comes after decades of non-recognition. Sudan pledged to take steps in 2020 alongside the Abraham Accords normalization deals between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. Cohen's visit to Khartoum was the first by an Israeli official acknowledged by Sudanese authorities, although there have been a series of unofficial visits in recent years. Cohen and Sudan's ruling Sovereign Council chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, discussed deepening cooperation in security and military matters, as well as agriculture, energy, health, water, and education. The full peace agreement is expected to be signed later this year. Sudan's military has been in charge of the country since an October 2021 coup, but says it intends to hand over power to a civilian government.
Definitely look forward to signing the agreement and then to having diplomatic representatives both in Israel and in Sudan. We haven't gotten to this part yet when we decide on an embassy opening here and there.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad railed against the development, condemning Sudan after decades of support for the Palestinian terror groups. They demanded that Sudan reverse course and called it a disgrace for the Arab nation. During the 3-decade rule of Islamist General Omar al-Bashir, Sudan was one of the staunchest supporters of Hamas and other terror groups, but since his ouster in April 2019, the policy has been dropped. As part of the agreement with Israel, the U.S. removed Sudan from its list of state sponsors of terrorism.
Joining me now with additional details on the normalization with Sudan and what this actually means is Executive Director of Sharaka, former IDF Major and Middle East Affairs and Security Expert, IDF Reserves Major Dan Pfefferman. Dan, so normalization between Israel and Sudan must be quite a blow for Hamas. Sudan was one of its staunchest supporters. What are the practical implications here?
Yeah, this has major implications. I mean,